ABC News. This is 9/11. Now reporting from New York, Peter Jennings.
We want to talk in this half hour about money. Those of us who have lived in other parts of the world know without a shadow of a doubt that this is the volunteer nation. Volunteerism exists in other countries, but nowhere does it exist to the degree that it does in the United States. And in the wake of 9/11, the volunteer instinct in terms of giving in every imaginable way was just on evidence for everybody in the country to see and to share. The massive outpouring of charitable donations was also unprecedented. 2 out of 3 Americans gave money to help the victims. More than $2 billion was raised by 300 charities. At least that's the best we can do with the number. And of course there were problems. Here's ABC's Cynthia McFadden.
We are forever indebted to the courage of Captain Timothy Stackpole.
When actress Meg Ryan introduced the widow and children of firefighter Timothy Stackpole at the benefit concert for the city of New York, the crowd cheered the fallen hero as his family tried to choke back tears.
Everybody in the audience started to chant his name, and it just was incredible. It was like this giant hug. You felt cared for, you felt loved, you knew you were gonna survive.
And with that outpouring of love came a deluge of donations, from telethons and celebrity appeals,
donate money,
to piggy banks and fire boots.
Thank you very much, sir.
The final tally? More than $2.3 billion. But it would turn out to be a lot harder to give it away than it was to collect it.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
First, the big picture. If this silver dollar represents all the money raised, an ABC News survey of 11 major charities shows that about 38 cents on each dollar went to the families of those killed or injured in the form of cash aid. About 32 cents on the dollar was spent on people who lost jobs and others affected by the attacks, as well as services like mental health counseling and legal aid. But that leaves a vast sum, 30 cents on our dollar, or about $690 million, that has not yet been spent. A year ago, this warehouse was filled with grieving family members applying for help. But did the money go where it was most needed, where the public wanted it to go? The answer may be no. A poll by the Chronicle of Philanthropy reveals that 42% of the American public say they have less confidence in charities now than they did before the attack. While dozens of families tell ABC News they are mostly satisfied with the charity's response, a snapshot of 3 families reveals how hard it is to meet both the donors' expectations and the victims' needs. Timothy Stackpole was a captain in the New York City Fire Department.
I didn't want them growing up thinking, well, Daddy died and look what we got.
For many Americans, it was heroes like Timmy Stackpole who inspired them to donate money. In 1998, he was burned on 30% of his body after rushing into a building to save lives.
I remember just praying to God, just let me die bravely.
He absolutely could have retired and didn't have to work, but he wanted to. That's what he was about.
He was just back, promoted to captain, the day before the planes hit the World Trade Center.
Nobody becomes a fireman to make money. The reason they could do what they did was because they knew that if, God forbid, something happened to them, their families would be taken care of.
As the widow of a firefighter killed in the line of duty, Tara Stackpole knew she was entitled to a $250,000 death benefit and her husband's salary for life. What she didn't count on was the kindness of strangers.
I just couldn't believe that how did I wake up in this position that people felt a need to help me and my family.
It's estimated that the families of the 343 firefighters who died will each receive, on average, over $1 million from charitable organizations. Most other families who lost a loved one will receive a fraction of that, about $175,000. Why? In part because nearly 20% of the money raised, close to $485 million, was given to charities exclusively for the survivors of the uniformed rescue workers.
There have been people who say, look, the firefighters' families are getting too much.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
It's uncomfortable. You know, you feel guilty, you feel like people are watching you all the time. I've heard people say that, oh, the fire widows, they've hit lotto. I mean, that's disgusting. Walk in my shoes for a day and then tell me I hit lotto.
Steve Russin was a bond trader at Cantor Fitzgerald.
He loved children, the toys, the games.
Boom! Base hit up the middle, yeah!
A doting father to his son, Alec, Russin would never meet his twin daughters. They were born 4 days after the towers fell. Andrea Russin never dreamed she would be raising their children alone.
I had formula. I had diapers, so many diapers that I was going to have to buy. And a lot of things that my husband and I had planned for that I was thinking I wasn't going to be able to afford.
With help from caseworkers, Russin spent hours every day pursuing both corporate and charitable donations. In addition to a nanny to help with the twins, the charities have paid for Russin's mortgage, utilities, counseling, day camp, and baby formula for the past year.
My daddy. I love you too, Daddy.
Still, she wonders if she did enough.
Maybe if I had gone through, spent more time and found more bills, I would have been able to get more. And so some of it is a game.
A frustrating one, especially since she feels the firefighter families receive special treatment.
It's very hurtful to my husband's memory that 3,000 people are not always thought of, and that 300 people have been glorified as heroes.
Russin says she received about $195,000 from 35 different charities. She will also receive her husband's life insurance and Social Security benefits, plus up to $100,000 and health coverage for 10 years from her husband's company.
We're not going out and buying yachts and Lamborghinis with this. We're raising our children forever.
Antonio Melendez was an illegal alien who made less than $18,000 a year working in the kitchen at Windows on the World.
I have to stand on my own 2 feet. If I fall, it's like my husband fell. It's like the Twin Towers falling all over again.
For a week after the attacks, Julia Hernandez searched desperately for her childhood sweetheart and common-law husband, Antonio. He was the family's sole source of support.
You're 28 years old, you have 4 little children, and you're here in this country illegally. Was there a point that you went and asked for help?
Yes, the super came and said the rent's due. I was already a month behind. That's when I went to ask for help with all my expenses.
Hernandez, who speaks almost no English, had no idea what aid she was entitled to or even how to apply.
It's hard because you go to places and they don't speak Spanish. And plus, going with all the kids, and then you take the little one and he gets a little restless and he starts crying.
Nevertheless, Hernandez says she has received about $95,000, plus money for rent, phone, and utilities from 4 major charities. She also gets Social Security benefits, health care coverage for 5 years, counseling, and $15,000 from a life insurance policy provided by Windows on the World.
I haven't lost hope, but I am worried because of my children, for their future.
3 widows, 3 vastly different sums. Is it fair?
It's not fair. In my house, if you have a loaf of bread, we split it up 5 ways, and everybody eats the same. We are all equal.
There is a simplicity that is appealing about taking the pie, dividing it very simply. On the other hand, there's an equally appealing argument that let's try to figure out who needs what so we can make sure the money goes to those who actually need it.
The problem is need itself is a slippery concept, especially after 9/11, when so many victims were so well off. What charities have traditionally tried to do is maintain a family's way of life at the time the tragedy struck, at least in the short run, which is why the widow of a bond trader might have a nanny paid for, while the widow of an undocumented kitchen worker would not. But Andrea Rustin and some other family members we talked to are concerned about something else. Remember, 62% of the money, or $1.4 billion, either hasn't been distributed yet or isn't going directly to the families at all in the form of cash aid.
The American public was so generous and so thoughtful, and I know that they knew about my children and all those other children out there. Where is our trust going to be after this whole thing is over if this money doesn't go to these children?
But the charities point out it wasn't just the children who lost a parent who were affected by September 11th. There are thousands of other victims, like the 55,000 displaced workers, who they also want to help. And there is planning for the future. The United Way, for example, is setting aside $200 million, or nearly half of the money it raised, for the long-term needs of victims, families, and communities.
There is a tension. There are frustrations. There are folks who think that they are rightful beneficiaries who are coming in and saying, we want the money spent immediately. There are others who are saying, let's slow it down to make sure we do it right. Each of these is a logical argument, and the charities are trying to do the right thing.
But what is the right thing?
Something special for the boys to have someday.
Yeah. For families who lost loved ones like Timothy Stackpole, Steve Russin, and Antonio Melendez, there is no easy answer. The only thing that's certain is that the cost of September 11th can never be measured in dollars alone.
If I could put it all together and hand it back to all of them and have Timmy back, I would do that in a heartbeat. They couldn't pay me enough money. Nobody could pay us enough money to replace what we lost.
Three extraordinary families, Peter. You know, one of the great controversial issues is the money that has yet to be spent, the 30 cents on every dollar, as we reported. In doing this report, we talked to the officials who were responsible for monies in Oklahoma City, and they pointed out that they felt it was very important to hold back some of the money because 7 years after Oklahoma City, they're still finding expenses for counseling and other kinds of services that the victims of that tragedy needed.
Well, that's really interesting. I know you're not going anywhere because I want to talk about government in just a moment, but before you do, I want to introduce Daniel Borokoff, who is the president of the American Institute of Philanthropy based in Chicago, and you're basically a watchdog organization, aren't you? You try to keep your eye on charities to see how they're doing. Just a simple question first and a short one. Is there charity fatigue?
Well, disaster fatigue can certainly set in with something as big as this, and that's why we hope there's not another big disaster that happens so soon after the one disaster, because people do start to get fatigued. But
and while I would never want to make the judgment about whether people get enough money, if people need money in America today who've been in some way victimized by this, can they almost invariably get access to money?
Most of them can, but what we're concerned about is the disparity, as you brought out in the piece, that certain victims, certain classes of victims, particularly the brave firefighters and rescue workers, are getting about $1.2 million, whereas you have other people that have lost their employment already on the edge, just getting a few $1,000s. And the charities went overboard raising money for people that were already protected through their jobs, through the Victims' Compensation Fund. So the role of charities here is to fill in the cracks and meet the needs that aren't being met by the far bigger players.
And isn't this in part because people give to those things which make them feel good, and the firefighters and the police were so central to our lives, and the workers, I think from 90 countries, or I've forgotten exactly how many, in the World Trade Towers restaurant up there, some of them even illegal, seemed to fall through the cracks for a while.
Right, because people don't want to think about some of the innocent people and people going through the hardships. And it's harder for the charities to raise money for those people. The charities tend to raise money for people that have the biggest emotional pull. So we have to do is, when we have to ask the charities of the public and say what's really needed, who are the people not getting helped, and insist the charities help those people, not help people that are already getting a lot of it.
One last question. I really appreciate your time. How much fraud did you come on?
Very little. So far, maybe $1 million, which isn't much considering it's probably up to $3 billion that it was raised. So there needs to be a lot more coordination. There needs to be a database set in place to kind of root out this fraud so people won't be double dipping.
But $1 million in over $1 billion is...
Yeah, it's very small. There may be more, but yeah, certainly that was fortunate that there wasn't a lot of fraud.
I appreciate you coming.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much. And I want to turn to government now, because it was 10 days after the attack that Congress established what's called the Victims' Compensation Fund. It was created as part of that multi-billion-dollar bailout package for the airline industry. And the aim was to distribute compensation to the families without delay, certainly, but only, it was very important, only if they agreed not to sue the airlines or anyone else in relation to the tragedy. And you may recall the payments to each family would be based on quite an elaborate formula that took several factors into account. I want to ask now, how effective has the fund been? And we're going to turn again to Cynthia McFadden.
This is the Brian. This is the Brian Moss claim. Brian was your husband.
Right.
Your husband.
We were married almost 10 years.
10 years, and he was in the Pentagon on that day, right?
What you are watching is a government official tell a widow how much her husband's life was worth in dollars and cents.
I have to look at the economics. I mean, it's a brutally sort of cold thing to do, but that's the way the statute works. I have to look at the economics of each individual, whether it's a victim or an injured person or whatever.
The widow is Mary Lou Moss. The official is Ken Feinberg, the man in charge of the federal fund that was created by Congress to compensate victims and survivors who lost their loved ones on September 11th. Although Feinberg is legally required to consider certain factors, his discretion is enormous and unprecedented.
These meetings give you a pretty good indication, give or take a little bit, what the number will be.
How does Feinberg put a price tag on each of the lives that were lost on September 11th? He uses a formula that he and his staff created. Here's how it worked for Mary Lou Moss and her 2 children. First, he automatically awards $250,000 for the deceased person's pain and suffering, and $100,000 for the surviving spouse and each dependent. Total, $550,000. Then he calculates the family's lost income, based primarily on the victim's salary when he died. Brian Moss, 34, was making $55,000 a year. Over the course of his career, that would amount to about $1.4 million. Finally, Feinberg is required by law to subtract life insurance, employee pension funds, and other offsets from the award. $550,000. The grand total?
The closest number right now, subject to corroboration, is around $1,450,000.
Feinberg's decisions are final and cannot be reversed by anyone.
I guess I was happier seeing the outcome of this than I anticipated. I anticipated getting a lot less.
Thank you, everybody.
So far, only 175 people of the nearly 3,300 eligible for the fund have completed their applications. The filing deadline is December 2003.
Well, we are joined now by Ken Feinberg, who is the special master of the September 11th Victims' Compensation Fund. Mr. Feinberg, thank you. I'm a little surprised and somewhat admiring that you come out in public, because while a great many people think you're absolutely brilliant and the right person to do this and deeply sympathetic, some of the families think you're the most awful person. I know you know this, so I'm not telling anything surprise. And that you are sort of settling their lives by a formula. Tell me, first of all, how hard's that for you, and which person are you really?
It's very difficult. I didn't fully anticipate the degree of emotion and anger and depression associated with September 11 families until I did what I think you have to do in this job, and that is go out and meet them. There's no substitute I've found in sitting down with the families in groups or individually and hearing what their concerns are, the future, the past, and try and deal with it as best you can with a statute that's fixed.
Do you think it's made you a more sensitive person?
I hope it has.
I realize there's some psychobabble in that question.
Well, I hope it has. It certainly opened my eyes to some of the suffering that September 11 caused.
Now, there are a lot of people who are eligible for money through the Victims' Compensation Fund if they choose. How many have chosen, roughly?
700. About 25%, a little less, have already filed. And the 700 have filed. There are only, Peter, to date, 11 lawsuits. That tells you, I think, the program is working. I predict that by December 2003, you'll have 90% of the families participating in the program.
And why do you think so?
Because, well, there are a couple of reasons. I'd like to think the main reason is that the families will come to realize that the program is unprecedented in its generosity. Congress, no country would do what we've done on this. And I think they'll come to realize that. I also think they'll do it because they want some small degree of psychological closure and move on with their lives after this anniversary. And finally, a technical reason. Congress stacked the deck. Anybody who litigates against the airlines or the World Trade Center will not win the case. They will not win the case. And if they win the case...
Do people actually know that? Do people, some people may be hanging back thinking, yes, I'll sue the airlines and maybe there's justification, and you actually believe that the deck is stacked against them.
Well, I personally don't think they can win the case. Right. Secondly, even if they win after litigating for, in our system, 5, 6, 7 years, they'll have to pay their lawyers 40%. The amount they can recover is capped by Congress. There's not enough money to pay all the claims, even if they did win. In the alternative, they come into this program, and once they accept my award, they get paid tax-free within 20 days.
2 questions. You put people through a 190-page form. There must simply be people who can't do that.
We'll sit down with them. I regret that the form is complicated, but understand, Congress said you must compute economic loss suffered by the victim. Well, computing economic loss case by case by case in which you will receive $1, $2, $3, $4 million tax-free, unfortunately, the application is complicated. We will sit with the families and help them fill out the application.
Am I correct, last question, that the median settlements, the middle settlement so far is $1,348,000?
That's right. Half the people are getting more than $1.3 million, half the people are getting less than $1.3 million. We are, and I think that will continue. I think that at the end of the program, the average award for each of these people, these family members, will roughly be 1.5, 1.8.
What's the lowest amount that anybody's getting?
Anybody who files will get $250,000 no matter what, just for filing the application.
And the most awarded?
Oh, I think we'll have some awards that will be high. I can see some.
People who made more money will get more money.
That's right. And of course, there's a big debate whether Congress was wise in allowing people to get varying amounts depending on income, but Congress decided that, and will enforce the law as the law was enacted.
I do not envy you. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and see us.
Thank you.
Today, Ken Feinberg, who is the master of the September 11th Fund, Old English title for a very tough job. Thank you.
Thank you.